Let's start with Khabib versus Conor. It's booked in, UFC 229, October the 6th in the heart of fighting. No, that's not outside a provincial town centre boozer, Las Vegas. And Dan, is it right in saying that this is the biggest fight of all time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, with the rise of the two fighters, obviously Khabib was quietly simmering for about 15 fights until he kind of hit the UFC. And then, he's become a massive star because he's so ferocious and so dominant. And then Conor McGregor is, the biggest star we've ever had in the sport. And fortunately, they're both in the same weight class. They're very, very different in characters and in fighting styles as well. It's a great match. And it could go either way as well. That's what makes it so exciting.
I think Conor not being in the octagon for best part of 12 months, best part of 2 years, not inside in a ring for the best part of 12 months since the Mayweather fight. It's just a whole different audience he's bringing to mixed martial arts now as well. We've used the term previously with certain stars like Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey about transcending the octagon, but this guy is taking it to a whole new level. I don't think there's anybody walking the streets of the UK now that aren't familiar with who Conor McGregor is, and all those eyeballs, he will drag them back to the octagon on October the 6th, and the sport really is ready to capitalise on that.
Because it's crazy.
I was surprised. Were you surprised, Nick, that they didn't allow himself a bit more time for a build-up, given the fact that this is going to be such a big fight?
100%. This the crazy thing. The last couple of fights that Conor's had in the UFC, there's also been world tours involved. Don't forget, there's a world tour with the Jose Aldo fight. There's a world tour with the Mayweather boxing match. This guy, he generates so many headlines that it made sense for this to maybe happen between Christmas and New Year and give ourselves 6 months of build-up. But they've decided to turn it round inside 60 days.
Because we talked about this on the podcast last week. We were looking at the dates. We knew it was going to be in Vegas. We looked at the 2 dates. There was one in October, which I'd heard might happen. But we all thought that, yes, it'll be, I think it was the 27th or the 28th or the 29th of December.
Yeah.
That'd be great. But yeah, it's ballsy. It's ballsy from the UFC. And Dan, it's ballsy from Conor McGregor. 2 years out of the octagon, no tune-up fight, nothing like that. Going up against a guy that has been called by lots of people terrifying.
Well, he is terrifying, but Conor McGregor is supremely confident, which is a part of the reason why he wins a lot of his fights before they even start. We don't know what he's been doing in his time off. You've got to think the amount of money he's got sitting in his account at the moment. He can do what he wants with his time, and he is a student of martial arts. There's no doubt about it. So although he's probably been enjoying his money, he's also probably been spending just as much time in the gym. So we don't know what he's been working on. We don't know how he's been improving. That's part of what makes it exciting for me, is because he is to an extent an unknown commodity coming into this.
Everybody I've spoken to in and around Conor McGregor has given me the same information back. Don't sleep on him. Don't think the fact that he's been out of the octagon for all this time is a reason to think his standard has dropped. Apparently, he grinds just as hard as he's ever done. The money hasn't changed him in terms of his desire and his want to prove this legacy fight. That's what we were saying last week. You got 100 million in the bank when 5 years ago you were on the dole. You get to this point in life and you think, you know what, I've won at life, and all your goals would drop. But apparently that's not the case with Conor McGregor. He's got work to do. He still wants to prove himself to be the greatest mixed martial artist the sport's ever seen. And you know what? By fighting Khabib, just by taking the fight with Khabib inside 60 days, that is such a big statement to make. And a performance here, a win here, and suddenly Conor's back at the top of everybody's pound-for-pound list.
Well, he's still there. He's not fought for however long. He's still number 2 or 3 in the pound-for-pound. In fact, he went up 1 without fighting for 2 years. Dan, this is the point. So he's stepping back in, almost 2 years out. What's the longest layoff you had? And can you stay sharp if you've just been grinding in the gym?
Yeah, you can stay sharp. I mean, there's a certain amount of timing that you would lose, and you lose that over time depending on how much you have away. But I mean, the longest I took was probably 8 or 9 months off, and that was after my 4-fight losing streak, and I needed to do something different. So there was a different motive for me there. I was in the gym every day trying to make improvements in my game and turn things around. Whereas Conor, I mean, he's effectively at the top of his game still. So we don't know what he's been adding to his game. Obviously, his confidence is in a different place, which changes things again. You can lose timing, of course. You can get some timing back through sparring, but regular fighting. In my early career, I was fighting every couple of weeks, and there's no timing like it. You feel so comfortable in there. So there is going to be a bit of adjustment. But then that's why he's got the X factor. Conor McGregor, he has the confidence that carries him through fights where people would normally fall apart.
And this whole mental thing, I think you mentioned it, Nick, that he's managed to break fighters beforehand. He did it with Jose Aldo. Aldo was a broken fighter mentally when he stepped into the octagon against him. He's not going to be able to do this against Khabib.
No, he isn't. And you know what? Maybe that's part of the reason why we're getting it so soon. You know, maybe it's, let's be honest here, this is Conor's world and we all live in it. You know, he's the biggest brand in mixed martial arts, bigger even than the UFC in a lot of ways. And I think he's come back to the UFC and he's coming back on his terms. Let's not make no mistakes about that. He's chose to fight on this date. He's chose to fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov. Conor's in control of all this. So you've got to ask yourself, why are we getting it so quickly? Potentially it's part of the reason is he doesn't want to do another world tour. He doesn't financially need it. He knows this fight sells itself anyway. But also part of it may be, I can't get in Khabib's head. Khabib's not going to change the way he fights. Like, he was able to get in the head of Jose Aldo when he first fought for the title, because Jose Aldo had this 10-year undefeated reign and everyone had paid him so much respect. And Conor got in his head during the press events. And when the actual fight came, Jose Aldo did something nobody expected him to do, and that's he run at Conor McGregor and basically ran into a shot and got himself knocked out. Khabib is going to run at Conor anyway. He's going to fly out. He's going to try and get as close to Conor as possible, throw Conor on his back and beat him up on the ground, because that's what he's done his entire career. That's what's made him 26-0. That's not going to change. So maybe we're getting it so soon because Conor feels like, let's just get it in there and get it done.
Do you think,
but
Dan,
there might be something else that's not being considered, and that's that. One thing that we do know about Khabib is that he does struggle to make 155 sometimes. Yep. And Conor's coming up from featherweight. You know, he made featherweight. Having Khabib might fight at featherweight, it might be absolutely impossible. So Conor might be banking on the fact that if he can turn this around quite quickly, he might force Khabib to cut weight quicker and tire quicker in the fight.
It's a really interesting thought, that. But there tends to be with Conor, if you look at it from the outside, from a great distance, it all tends to be action and mania, but everything has a plan.
Of course, you know, it looks like chaos, but believe you me, you don't become as successful and as rich as he is without having something between your ears. He knows what he's doing. Everything is thought out. He's a very intelligent man, Conor. People don't give him enough credit. I think he gets the credit technically inside the octagon, but outside of it as well, he's shrewd as anything. You know, he owns numerous businesses now, and a lot of them he hasn't actually started himself, but he's used his fame, his popularity, and everything else to pull them businesses in. You know, it's like the UFC. You know, we heard last time he was talking about fighting in the UFC, he was saying, I don't want wages, I want shares. You know, and suddenly that's all gone quiet now. So something would suggest there that Conor McGregor may well be some kind of shareholder in this, because he's that big himself. Individually as a brand, he's huge. And I think he will have approached this fight, as I say, he's chosen Khabib, he's chosen the date, he knows something we don't. And as speaking to his team around him, they think Khabib is primed and ready for Conor McGregor.
I want to try and break down this fight in just a second. First, though, what's quite interesting, if you've watched any of the promotional material for UFC 229, the whole bus antics, the fact that he took on this bus, which at the time in the UFC's eyes, Dan's, was a disgrace to the sport, it's now a promotional tool.
Yeah, but you know, it's a part of the narrative. We can't avoid that. It's the same situation with John Jones and Cormier when they had that scuffle at in the lobby of the MGM. You know, that's why we tune in. It's the same thing with Cody and TJ at the weekend. I mean, how many times did we see Cody grab TJ by the throat in the Ultimate Fighter house? Yeah. I mean, that's assault in America. You know, we get away with a lot over here because it's a different kind of culture. But in America, everyone's suing everybody, and there's a lawsuit in there. But the UFC are using it for promotion because, I'll be honest, it makes me want to watch the fight more. You know, I like that drama. I like to see two guys genuinely not like each other. It's good to watch two competitors compete, but it's best to watch two fighters fight.
This is sports entertainment at the end of the day, and it's all about the narrative, and that is part of the narrative, as Dan says. You know, this is fight sports. It's been like this forever. It's not doing anything different here. The UFC haven't reinvented the rule book here. This has been going on for a long time. Lennox Lewis versus Mike Tyson. Part of the reason it sold so well is because of the scuffle they had on the stage. The fact that Tyson had bitten Evander Holyfield's ear, but his background was so bad, and Lennox was so pure and clean and lived with his mum and everything else. This is part of the narrative here. You've got this completely unconventional Dagestani monster that seems to have running through everybody. And then you've got this wild, maverick, multi-millionaire, eccentric in Conor McGregor as well. And these two worlds are colliding. And this is fight sport at the end of the day. You can't expect these guys to fight inside an octagon and go full throttle to finish each other and everything else, and not expect the monsters to sometimes go roaming in the streets.
It's going to be a great fight. For people who don't know, Dan, who don't know Khabib Nurmagomedov, just explain what sort of fighter he is, where he's come from, because he really is a Terminator.
He is, yeah. I mean, he's a Dagestani wrestler. He's trained by his father, and he's got a crew of guys around him that are all incredibly strong wrestlers as well. His striking's very unorthodox. He spent his recent years preparing at AKA, So obviously he's got Cormier and Velasquez and all the other great coaches, Bob Cook, Javier Mendez. There's a lot of knowledge in that gym, and if you've got a raw talent and a strong wrestler like Khabib, trying to turn him into a mixed martial artist, he's a great commodity to play with as a coach. And since he's been in the UFC, I mean, he's not really had to fall back on his striking a great deal. We've seen a couple of knockouts from him, but they were very unorthodox punches. I mean, I've broken them down on inside the octagon. We'll call it the eagle punch or whatever you like, but it's like an uppercut, but his arm is in a position of a hook. It's a very, very strange technique, but it works really well for him, and it sets up his takedowns. And that's ultimately what his game is about. He wants to smash you up against the fence. He ties people's legs up. He triangles his legs around there so they don't have a base, don't have a way out. And then he beats them up. And the most terrifying thing for me about it is that he talks to them while he's doing it. You go back and watch the Michael Johnson fight. He's saying, I need to fight for the title. I deserve this. Mm-hmm. It's very, very unnerving to see that happening. And I can't even imagine what it would be like as an opponent. So he's terrifying. And now because his English is getting better as well, he's even more intriguing because we're starting to get inside his head a bit more and learn about him as an individual. He's got a real character and he's got a lot of personality as well.
Because a bit like Beyonce or Bono, we've just known him by this one name, this Khabib, this Dagestani. So what happens in the fight then? Because you mentioned there, Dan, you mentioned inside the octagon. This is where you break down with John Gooden, you break down the fights, 30 minutes, you can watch them, great detail as well. I'm sure you've had this fight on your mind for a long time because it's been swirling around. How would you see the fight going?
The first thing that we've got to think about is how Conor's going to approach this, because he knows Khabib's going to come forward. It's going to be difficult for Conor to push Khabib up against the fence like he has done everybody else, and that's where he usually lines people up for the power left hand. It's going to be different in this one because Khabib's going to push forward no matter what Conor's throwing. He's going to be willing to block. He did the same thing to Edson Barbosa, who's a vicious kicker. And he walked through most of his kicks, knows it's going to hurt, knows he's going to have to weather an early storm, but he also knows that when he gets his hands on someone, he does what he likes. And because he's still unbeaten, it's never been proven any different to him. No one's ever really caught him with a good shot and put him down. I mean, we saw him hurting in the Michael Johnson fight, but Khabib's main vulnerability for me in this fight is that he's got no footwork. He only knows forward. There's no idea of cutting off the octagon until he's actually got his hands on someone. So that's where Conor gets into this fight. He's very intelligent, like Nick said. He's going to be good at circling off and walking Khabib onto that left hand. I think this is going to be a very different version of Conor than we've ever seen. I think we're going to see a lot more lateral movement and more footwork. I think he's going to come in slightly lighter and better conditioned. And I think he's going to expect to be taken down at least a couple of times. But, going back to the point I made earlier, the quick turnaround of this fight to me tells me that he's thinking if he can get Khabib to be mainly focused on his weight cut for the fight and overconfident that he's going to be able to do what he always does, then Conor can predict what he's going to do when he actually gets in there and then set him up. And I think that, whether in an early storm is likely for Conor, I think he's probably going to have to maybe even get out the first round, get back to his feet a couple of times. But I think he'll find a place for that left hand at some point, maybe late second, early third. And I think Khabib will walk onto it. And we've seen him slow down in the Al Iaquinta fight. First time we've seen him do 5 rounds. Yep. He did slow down. There were points where you start thinking to yourself, if he was fighting Conor here and there was that sharp left hand in the toolbox, he'd be in trouble.
There's certain fights from Nurmagomedov's UFC tenure that I look back on and I take, a lot of signs from where I kind of think, what he's going to do. He can't change his game plan because it's 1 in 26 straight fights, so he isn't going to change. He's going to come in with exactly the same momentum. But you look at the performances against Michael Johnson and, as Dan said there, against Al Iaquinta last time out, they're the fights I really analyse because they're the fights where he was getting tagged frequently as well. And, especially in the last fight, I'm kind of looking at that thinking if that's Conor McGregor in there, he can finish this fight. He carries way more power than Al Iaquinta. He's far more ruthless than him as well. He picks his shots so much better. Right here, right now, we can say categorically what Khabib is going to do because he does it in every fight. But we can't say that about Conor. We've seen 3 or 4 different versions of Conor already in the UFC. And as Dan says, I think we'll see an even better version again here against Khabib. I keep coming back to the fact that this is Conor's world. He wants this fight. This is his legacy fight. He knows what this means. And the fact that he's jumped straight back in after pretty much a 2-year hiatus with a guy that everybody's terrified of means that Conor and his team see chinks, probably the same chinks that we see. And I'm with Dan. I see this going the same way as the Chad Mendes fight, and anyone that's seen that knows that Conor got put on his back by a wrestler. He got grounded out a little bit in the first round, but then he got back to his feet. And listen, the start of every round stands on your feet. And as long as this fight's on its feet, it's in Conor's world. And I think soon enough, he'll land the shot and Khabib will be over.
And I sort of agree with both of you. The fact is, if we were talking about any other fighter on the planet coming back after 2 years to fight someone like Khabib, you wouldn't give him a hope.
Nope.